Welcome to the 128th season of the Canadian Club Toronto, Canada's Podium. For over a century, this platform has been a gathering place for visionaries, public figures, and decision makers to discuss the most pressing issues of our time.
We've been having important discussions and debates around this podium in this country for well over a century. I call this a historic podium of record.
Our club's always been a forum for visionaries, public figures, and decision makers to command attention to the issues of our time.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
And we're quiet. I'm just waiting for my cue. I hope you enjoyed your breakfast and your conversations, and a good morning and welcome to our live stream audience who just joined. My name is Sabine Hirji, and I'm a Canadian Club Toronto director and your host for this morning. Energy is vital to Canada's economic prosperity, energy security, and global influence. We rely on energy for economic growth, national infrastructure, and international trade. Balancing economic growth with environmental sustainability remains a significant challenge and opportunity, and the ongoing transition to cleaner energy sources will shape the future of Canada's energy landscape. As Canada's Podium, we lead the way in addressing the issues of the day, offering opportunities to hear and to learn from the leaders behind the headlines. Now, our events would not be possible without the support of our sponsors. We are grateful for the season-long sponsorship of the Canadian Bankers Association. We appreciate the generosity of Air Canada, our official airline sponsor, and Canada's Forest Trust, who help us offset our carbon footprint through the planting and stewarding smart forests in our honor. Thank you all for your ongoing support. Today's event sponsor is CIBC. A warm welcome to Team CIBC. As a former banker, it's great to see some familiar faces in the room, and we're grateful, CIBC, for your sponsorship. I'm also delighted to welcome students from Toronto Metropolitan University and the Rotman School of Management at U of T. Please raise your hands and make some noise. We appreciate the support from these two leading academic institutions. A few quick housekeeping items. Please visit our website at canadianclub.org for upcoming events. While this is the final event of 2024, we've got some great events already planned for next year. Not a current member? Consider giving yourself a gift of membership. Already a member? What about a holiday season gift to a colleague or a mentee? We also offer free access to our events on demand and our live stream, and encourage you to post about today's event on your favorite social media platforms. There are hashtags on your table and on screen. Have a question for Scott, our guest of honor? Use the Q&A cards on your table. Volunteers will collect them and hand them to our moderator throughout the discussion. And for those of you who are joining virtually, hit the red Q&A button on the right side of your screen. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker and moderator. Scott Balfour was appointed President and CEO of Emera in 2018. He joined Emera as Chief Financial Officer in 2012 and took over as Chief Operating Officer in 2016 before becoming CEO in 2018. He has been instrumental in steering the company toward growth in North America and the Caribbean, diversification, and a greater focus on clean energy solutions. Emera's achievements reflect its commitment to balancing economic growth with environmental stewardship and social responsibility. The company's strategic focus on clean energy, infrastructure modernization, and community engagement positions it as a leader in the global energy transition. Recognized for his leadership in 2021, Scott was named CEO of the Year by Atlantic Business Magazine. I did do a bit of sleuthing beyond ChatGPT to see if I could find anything else out. Don't get too worried, Scott. But I do understand that he is most proud of his family, and we are delighted that his wife Stella and twin sons Mike and Nick, who work in Toronto, have joined us this morning. Thank you for being here. And one more thing, I had a chance to speak with Scott and many of the executives at Emera, and I can certainly see the culture, the teamwork, and really that balance of humanity and performance. And the two of them are really two sides of the same coin. Our moderator is the Honourable Lisa Raitt. Lisa doesn't need an introduction, but I'll do it anyway. As Vice Chair, Global Investment Banking, CIBC Capital Markets, she provides senior client coverage in the energy, infrastructure, and industrial sectors. She co-chairs the National Coalition for a Better Future, focused on fostering a more inclusive, sustainable, and prosperous Canada. Lisa is also an inspiring advocate for dementia research and addressing caregiving challenges, and has brought me to tears on a number of occasions as she has spoken about this. She was elected to the House of Commons in 2008, where over 10 years she held 3 senior portfolios: Minister of Transport, Minister of Labour, and Minister of Natural Resources, and also served as a deputy leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. On a more personal note, I have the pleasure to serve alongside Lisa on the Public Policy Forum Board. Please put your hands together to give a warm Canadian Club and Toronto welcome to Scott and Lisa.
Oh, watch first step. Thank you.
We're the closers for 2024, Scott. I don't know how I feel about that. That's going to be a high. Well, hopefully we'll leave you a little bit inspired instead of depressed going into 2025, because there's a lot of stuff out there that depresses. Before we start, I just wanted to tell a quick story. On Friday night, I enjoy doing these fireside chats, and I was doing one with Premier Dennis King out in PEI in Charlottetown. And in the middle of, just before we took the stage, like we took the stage here, Tom Mulcair texted me and he said, "Did you have any idea that this was going to happen?" And I thought, what is he talking about? So immediately I went to X and I Googled to see what was this that was happening. And it was the fact that the Prime Minister had gone down to Mar-a-Lago for dinner. So I'm up on the stage. Ironically, the Prime Minister had been in Charlottetown that morning. So I said to the Premier, "Aren't you lucky? You had the Prime Minister here at lunch today for an announcement, and now he's gone to dinner with somebody who's not as popular as you are in Prince Edward Island." And I said, "He's in Mar-a-Lago." And the room erupted in laughter, not because of my joke, because they thought I was joking about the Prime Minister going to Mar-a-Lago. And then when I said, "No, he's literally there," everyone went very, very quiet in the room. So hopefully we're not going to follow the same situation today. Scott, thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for asking me to moderate with you. I'm pretty sure it's because I am actually a ratepayer in Nova Scotia, and I'm listening very carefully to all of your answers because I have a keen interest in what's going to be happening in the coming months. But I wanted to ask you if you would start with our audience to give a general overview of the sector from your perspective at Emera, because you are a unique organization, not for the least of which you're on the east coast of Canada, but you have many different holdings in the United States as well.
Yeah, so first of all, Lisa, thank you for doing this. It's very, very kind. Thank you for all of you and coming to listen to this conversation. There's a lot going on in the energy industry, and of course the energy industry has been core to Canada, the Canadian economy for a long time. And you're right, from Emera's perspective, we started from very humble roots, growing from Nova Scotia Power, the provincial utility that serves the province of Nova Scotia, and now have grown far beyond the presence in Nova Scotia. We operate electric utilities and gas utilities in Atlantic Canada, in the U.S., mostly in Florida, and the Caribbean. And what's been interesting about that is sort of being able to see sort of the world of energy from the perspective of being in different regions and different countries, and there are differences. And from a Canadian perspective, we have so much promise and so much opportunity, but we are in the midst of a transition with an industry that is seeing change at a pace like we've never seen before. And it's really important we get this right, because if we don't get it right, the cost of energy being too high can obviously have impacts not just on affordability for ratepayers, for customers, as we refer to, but those customers are also businesses and industries that if we don't get right, that has its own negative impact in terms of the Canadian economy and our competitiveness with the U.S. So this energy transition, which is incredibly complex, is just so important to get right.
Do you find that there's a difference between consumer attitude in the United States versus Canada?
Yes and no. I think the themes around, what's interesting as we think about and hear from our customers around what's important to them. I would say there's a slightly different narrative as to what we hear from customers versus what we talk about within the industry, what we talk about with governments. Because of course, within the industry and with governments, cleaner is a really important part of the conversation.
Right.
As we talk to customers, frankly, the most important thing is reliability.
Yeah.
And the next most important thing is affordable. And cleaner is kind of a distant third. It's important, but it's third to those other two important things. And I think that is true in Nova Scotia, that's true in Florida, in New Mexico, in the Caribbean. I'd say that's true across all of our customer bases.
Which means when you're thinking about energy transition, you got to think about it from a couple of different places, especially when it comes to the speed of it, because it's going to be hard to keep it cost down if we're bolting ahead really quickly. So what does transition mean to you at Emera?
Yeah, and speed, we refer to pace as such an important part of the conversation. And again, because we started in Nova Scotia, and you having lots of experience in that region, Lisa, it is not the most economically vibrant province in the country. It's got some bounce to it now, which is great, but it is, relative to the Canadian economy, the average income in Nova Scotia would be among the lowest, and so affordability is a really acute issue there. And at the same time, the utility, Nova Scotia Power, has been leading a transition that has seen massive shift. It is not that long ago where over 80% of the energy for Nova Scotia Power was either coal or oil. Yeah. And today, more energy is generated from renewable sources in Nova Scotia than is generated from coal. And today, over 40% of the energy supply in Nova Scotia is from renewable sources. It has been a massive transition. Yeah. There's still a ways to go, but it's been a massive transition. And the way that that's happened is really being mindful about pace. Because the reality is, the faster you go, the more expensive it is. And we've seen that, right? We saw that here in this province. I spent some time living in this province, engaged in the energy industry, and we saw that with the Green Energy Act and some of the transition that happened here. We've seen it in California, we've seen it in Germany. When the pace is very fast, the cost of energy rises, and so pace is such an important part of the conversation to get that right and be thoughtful to be able to manage the affordability impacts.
Yeah, and governments and specifically politicians hear very clearly from the constituents that they go and visit when they're asking for their vote what they think about in terms of how much they're paying for their electricity, how much they're paying for their power. And there was a breakneck speed, I think, I would say, for the first 5-6 years between 2015 and 2023, but things seem to have slowed down a little bit. Is that a fair analysis, or where are we standing right now in the transition?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting as I think about it, if we compare Nova Scotia and Florida, that would be sort of our two largest jurisdictions. One of the businesses we own, our largest business today, is Tampa Electric, so it serves the greater Tampa area. So the journey for Nova Scotia Power in terms of decarbonizing, cleaning the energy grid, has largely been to meet government legislation. Okay. Whether that is provincial or federal, is required to achieve certain clean energy standards. There are no clean energy standards in Florida. There's no federal imposition of carbon reduction. There's no state requirement for carbon reduction. And yet, in Florida, we've actually seen very significant change. We acquired Tampa Electric back in 2015, 2016, at which point there was essentially no renewable energy on the grid there. Today, there's almost 1,500 megawatts of solar energy in the grid in Florida, more solar per customer than any other utility in the state of Florida. And that 1,500 megawatts is not that far off of the total amount of energy that we generate in Nova Scotia. It's a large amount of solar, and that has all been done based upon cost benefit for customers, proven that investment has been the most cost-effective investment for customers. In Nova Scotia, the journey, as I say, has been driven by policy, and there's still some policy objectives to achieve. Right. So the Government of Canada has imposed that the coal plants in Nova Scotia across Canada have to be closed by 2030, and that the 40-ish% renewable that Nova Scotia Power is at now needs to be at 80% by 2030. Ooh. So I wouldn't say the pace has slowed yet. Yeah. And so in Florida, all these investments are being driven by economic signals. In Nova Scotia, the pace is being accelerated in order to meet government policy by both federal and provincial governments.
And in that time of transition, which is pretty quick, 2030, do you find that there's an increase in demand in Nova Scotia that you also have to deal with? So it's not just about transitioning in your current situation, it's you have to transition and then think about the growth that's happening, because there's still growth happening and there's renewal that's happening in Nova Scotia as well. Yeah,
it's such an important point. This whole energy transition conversation, as I say, is really complex. The electricity grid anywhere is a massive machine. And it was built 100 years ago. And we're now sort of needing to not only adjust as it relates to the energy transition part being cleaner sources of generation, but we're also using energy different, electric vehicles being a prime example, which is putting increased pressure and importance on reliability. Reliability is being challenged by these intermittent sources of energy that we're adding, wind and solar type resources, feed the grid differently than the big sort of thermal generators of natural gas type generation. That adds some challenge to reliability. We're seeing, of course, increased frequency of more severe weather. Right. In Florida, of course, blessed with many members of the team here, some of the members here from Florida, worked through 2 successive hurricanes. Of course, not that long ago, Hurricane Helene and Milton. But in Nova Scotia, what's interesting in terms of seeing impacts there over the last 10 years, the team tracks the number of hours that wind speeds are greater than 80 kilometers an hour. And over the last 10 years, it's been twice as many hours as it was over the 10 years previous. Okay. That puts incremental pressure on the system, needing investments for reliability. And then how we're using energy is, the grid wasn't set up for every driveway and every house to have an electric vehicle and plug it in at the same time. Right. Just wasn't built for that. So all those investments are needing to happen. At the same time as we're making these investments for cleaner energy, at the same time, to your point, is demand is also increasing. That's one of the main drivers and themes that we're seeing across the industry now is resource adequacy. In some jurisdictions, not as significant yet in ours, but data centers is a big topic within the energy sector, and just having enough electricity in order to meet the massive demand that is coming from these data centers. But if I sort of put this and bring it into a Canadian context for a second, there is a lot of focus on energy transition, but what gets lost in the discussion is the Canadian electric system is already one of the cleanest in the world.
Yeah.
It is the third cleanest among all G20 countries, second only to France and to Brazil with nuclear and hydro-based energy. Somewhere between 80 and 85% of the energy system, the electricity system in Canada is already non-emitting, which includes nuclear. So hydro, nuclear, wind, solar. But interestingly, if you move that into sort of where those jurisdictions are, more than 90% of more than 80% of Canadians today get their electricity with more than 90% of it being completely emission-free.
Right.
So four out of every 5 Canadians have electricity supply that is more than 90% clean. So we have a huge head start relative to, for example, our biggest trading partner, the US, 40% emission-free. So Canada, over 80% emission-free, the US, only 40% emission-free. The challenge for us is getting from 80% to net zero is really hard. Every incremental percent is that much harder, that much more expensive. And just to put it in context, you know, there is policy ambitions for the electric sector to be net zero by 2035.
Yeah.
And I'm here to tell you that is not going to happen. That is not possible. And to put it in context, in order to take that last 15 to 20% of our existing energy supply in Canada, forgetting about meeting growing demand, just to meet the current demand, would be needing to replace all those thermal plants with 24 Muskrat Falls generating stations, or 23 Site C generating stations. And we all know how long and how complex those projects are. It would be 18 more nuclear units like those that exist at Bruce or Darlington. This is not going to happen by 2035, let alone meet the increasing supply. So part of this is just about having honest conversations about the path ahead. While we talk about the Canadian energy system being so clean, that is true on a national level, but there are regional differences. Alberta, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia are not yet at the point of saying 85% non-emitting. But we need to lean into that and celebrate the fact that on a national basis, we have one of the cleanest energy systems in the world, and not try to get everybody across every province across the country to the same standard. Otherwise, we're going to drive incremental cost that, again, brings us back to those challenges of affordability and economic impact.
Yeah, and just to be clear, by saying that, you're just expressing a fact, a physical impossibility. It's not a political statement at all about saying that we're not on board with the government's wishes to go. It's just, you really just can't do it.
Our industry, you know, including our businesses, we're all in for decarbonizing. And we've been leading the way in many cases. But if we're going to have an honest conversation about it, it is not possible for the electric sector to be net zero by 2035. We will get there. But it won't happen by 2035.
And you came from the construction sector like 1 million years ago. That's where we first met, when you were in another place.
We were both in different roles at different times.
At different times, on the same side of the table, though, I think. So that was a positive thing. But looking at that sector, even more difficulties in terms of having the people.
The capacity.
The capacity to get it done.
Exactly
we can really only take on so many projects. You mentioned hurricanes, Scott. I mean, you must be one of the very few electric utilities that has experienced hurricane both in Florida and in Nova Scotia.
Well, it gets better. We also have some operations in the Caribbean. So
So you're Hurricane King. That's awesome.
You know, a few people in the room who have had personal experience living through and working through some of those hurricanes. And we've seen, you know, some Dorian sort of, you know, worked its way up through the Caribbean and up through the coastline in Florida and into Nova Scotia. But this is one of the things about this industry that is really quite special, is seeing not just our businesses, but across the sector, how the teams respond to serve customers after a severe event like that. It is truly a special thing, and the industry comes together. We share resources, and So most recently in Florida with Hurricane Helene and Milton, there were resources that went down to Florida from Nova Scotia, from Nova Scotia Power, but from other provinces in the country and from many states across the U.S., all in to help restore customers as quickly as possible. It's quite a special thing.
Yeah, and I guess you would have that ability internally to be able to deploy resources, or at least knowledge. For example, you don't think Nova Scotia gets hurricanes, but we've been getting them.
Right, and if it's not a hurricane, it's a tropical storm, so it brings the same kind of conditions with severe wind and rain, and of course in Nova Scotia there's a lot of tree canopy, and because there's so much rock in Nova Scotia, it's very hard to bury electric lines, and
I
so
did not know that.
lines into trees is a big deal. It's, we can bury them in Florida.
Yeah.
Very hard to do that in Nova Scotia. It's incredibly expensive just because of the amount of rock that is in the subsurface.
That's really interesting. And of course, storm surge is one of the things that you would deal with in Florida as opposed to in Nova Scotia.
Yeah, it is, and certainly, many of us were sort of watching Hurricane Milton come in, and sort of with the experience of Hurricane Helene only a few weeks before that had roughly a 10 to 11 foot storm surge in the Tampa region. So that's a big deal. But lots of learnings that come from that, and this is an industry that responds to those kind of events in terms of flood wall protection, and we even see Tampa General Hospital had sort of a neat response. They brought in temporary flood walls, which was sort of really interesting. So this is one of those sectors where we are able to learn, respond, adjust, and so climate adaptation, frankly, in our sector and many sectors is just as important as the efforts that are being made to decarbonize and deal with climate change.
Yeah. One last question for me then. Thank you very much for the questions from the audience. These are the scary ones, Scott. They're the ones that other people can ask. I did want to ask you, though, one of the challenges in Nova Scotia, and perhaps in Florida as well, is working with rural communities. And how does Emera approach working with stakeholders there, or working with, for example, Indigenous communities, because they're different than working within an urban sector?
Yeah, and it's again some of those things that we learn a few lessons along the way in terms of how important that is, in terms of being local and being seen as local with our field operations, but with Indigenous communities too. Of course, as we're building linear infrastructure, the Maritime Link is an example, the subsea interconnection between the province of Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. Lots of engagement, of course, there with First Nations. But more recently, the team is, I think it's a first in Canada. The Nova Scotia Power team has brought in WMA as sort of a community of 13 Mi'kmaq communities in Nova Scotia as an equity partner in a battery project that they're doing, 150 megawatts of batteries. It's been facilitated with the Canada Infrastructure Bank in order to support the financing for both Nova Scotia Power and WMA, the Mi'kmaq community, which is great. That's how we need to do things, right? We need to engage in these communities, build partnerships, build trust, because frankly, we need to build a lot of linear infrastructure in this country. Transmission infrastructure, whether it's oil and gas or electric infrastructure, we need lots more east-west movement of this energy in order to capitalize on the great head start that we've got in Canada around these natural resources, but we need to share it interprovincially.
Yeah. So the most burning question I think that I've received, thank you whoever asked it, Scott, do you recommend moving to Nova Scotia?
Nova Scotia is a great place to live. It really is. So, I was born and raised in Oakville. My wife born and raised in Hamilton. Of course, we still have family here, but moved to Nova Scotia 12 years ago. It's the best thing we did. Nova Scotia's got some bounce to it now. Restaurant scene is great. The community is great. The arts community is great. There's a lot to like in Nova Scotia. And as much as I love my time here in Toronto, oh my God, the traffic! It's
you're talking to it. Wait till the snow happens.
Yeah, people
today.
complain about the traffic in Nova Scotia. It's like it's definitely worse in Toronto. So yeah, it's a great place to live.
You talk a lot about the Nova Scotia government, the federal government, and the wishes of Canadians actually to get off of coal in terms of burning for electricity generation. But coal is a worldwide problem. Do you see an ability for the world to be able to stop burning coal?
I do, but truthfully, Canada is not the problem
Right.
in this challenge. That would be, China, India. China is still building coal plants.
Yeah.
So as focused as we are in closing ours, and we should and we need to, and that's all good. But the reality is, Canada is not the challenge as it relates to the global consumption of coal, and there's not very much we can do about coal consumption in China, obviously.
Yeah.
So, but we need to do our part.
Yeah.
But we just need to make sure that we are not damaging affordability for customers and our Canadian our overall economic profile as we continue to decarbonize.
Yeah. So the government has a number of items still making its way through Parliament, actually. So they've attempted to put some pieces in place in order to compete with the United States and what they've done in the Inflation Reduction Act and their various other legislations that they've used in order to spur on their transition. Where are we in Canada, and what do we need to do in order to give the ability for a company like Emera to do what it needs to do for transition?
Yeah, I'll be a little controversial here and say I don't think we have energy policy right yet in this country.
I'm not going to argue with you on that, so feel free.
Yeah.
Educate the room.
So as I say, first of all, I think collectively have not brought enough attention to the fact that we already have one of the cleanest electric grids in the world. But again, watching the dynamic in the U.S. and the dynamic in Canada with the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure and Jobs Act and the amount of capital that is actually being invested and is moving there, the U.S. approach to sort of their climate ambitions, generally aligned with decarbonizing the electric sector first, because it's the easiest. The electric sector is already in Canada decarbonized 65%, compares to 2% for transportation and 5% for buildings. So huge progress on the electric sector, and appropriately so, because it can help decarbonize other parts of the economy as we decarbonize. However, the U.S. approach has largely been carrots. It's been incentives, incenting investment, rewarding investment, encouraging investment, and it's happening.
Yeah.
The Canadian approach has been a little more stick-based.
Yeah.
We have lots of policies. They're kind of pancaking on top of each other, and frankly, it's making it really complicated to allocate capital, and just even to attract the capital, which is increasingly competitive in this market. So we've got a carbon tax, of course. We have a closed coal mandate, as I spoke about. In some provinces, including Nova Scotia, we have to achieve 80% renewable by 2030. And of course, now there's clean energy regulation, CERs, that is restricting the use of natural gas in electricity generation. And frankly, it's all too much. We don't need all of those signals. We need sort of one clear policy that frankly doesn't forget about the importance of attracting the investment profile. We really need to be able to encourage investment to help to drive the economy, to help to drive jobs, with policy ambitions in mind. But let's not start with the goal. Let's start with how do we attract the capital with a view to reducing emissions, as opposed to putting the sticks in place and then figure out, okay, well, hopefully the capital will come in order to make this happen.
Yeah. And with all of the regulation and the direction that we're going in, recognizing that pace can equate into more expense, how does Nova Scotia Power, how does Emera sell the reality to your stakeholders? How do you make it more affordable at the end of the day?
It's hard, and as a utility, part of the challenge in those environments, and it's not unique to Nova Scotia Power and Emera, but in those environments where we're meeting government legislation, we're executing government policy on decarbonizing in Nova Scotia. The hard part is that we're the ones that deliver the bill.
Yeah.
And so, part of this is around communication. That's hard. Of course, but part of it is sort of a realization, a communication that's saying, look, we are executing government policy and trying our best to inform governments as to the trade-off between pace and cost. And fortunately, we work constructively with all levels of government in order to try and shape public policy in a way that is balanced, and there's a linkage between the policy and the cost impacts for customers. But it's hard because, of course, there's political appeal to decarbonizing type policies, to putting in place policies, and part of our job is to help to make sure there's a connection to the impact on cost and affordability and the economy, and part of the reason for a conversation like this today.
One of the replacements for coal is nuclear. Small modular nuclear, the big stuff, whatever fits for that area. Does Nova Scotia have any thoughts around, given that there is a moratorium on nuclear in Nova Scotia?
Not anymore.
Not anymore? Oh, well, tell us what's going on in Nova Scotia then.
That's new. So the Houston government did eliminate the moratorium that exists as it relates to nuclear. Look, I think with nuclear, so Canada has a great history, of course, with nuclear energy, with the CANDU reactors. But the trouble is, globally, including in Canada, sort of that continued investment and development of that technology really took a pause for a period of time, and it's kickstarted again now, which is great. But the technology needs to be recertified, needs to be reproven. The focus on small modular reactors is exciting now. They're not that small and they're not that modular, but they're smaller and they're more modular. But they're still really, really complex things. And again, in the sector I came from, we were involved in the construction and refurb of many CANDU reactors over the years. So the journey for Nova Scotia, it won't be Emera Nova Scotia Power that is leaning into the development of this technology. Ontario Power Generation is for sure one of the best firms globally, but certainly in Canada, to be leading that initiative, and they are. They're leaning hard to develop that technology, and it's exciting, and we are cheering them on. And when it gets commercially proven and economically viable, then for sure Nova Scotia Power and other utilities will be looking to adopt that technology, but we're not looking to develop it.
Right. There's a new president in the United States. And he is already making waves, talking about tariffs and increasing amount of tariffs. We talked about this before. There's not a massive impact on your business. But I'm wondering if you can maybe give us an idea of what you're seeing in the United States and how they're approaching possible policy changes. Like, is the IRA going to be tamped down? Is there going to be are they going to take away some of the carrots that were there?
Yeah, and that is the big open question, is what will happen with the IRA that is impactful for us. Sort of the solar investment tax credits, as an example, helps to reduce the cost of that technology for customers, which is an important thing. We have one project that we're looking at developing in Florida at one of our generation sites. Quite a unique site, is looking at carbon capture and storage in the application of a gas-fired generation unit at scale, which would be among the first in the world, and that is enabled by the 45Q tax credits component of the IRA. So we do, this does matter. This does matter to us. It's interesting in terms of what will happen ultimately. Obviously, we don't know. But the IRA, one of those elements of policy has been creating investment and been creating jobs. And that's something that matters, will matter to President Trump in his second term of office. It's also very complicated legislation that makes it very complicated to repeal. So remains to be seen what will happen. I think there'd be many learned voices that would have a view that components of the IRA will probably get repealed, but not all of it. We're hopeful that the 45Q tax credits do not get repealed. There'd be some logic as to why that might not happen, but ultimately we'll see.
So last question, and here's your opportunity to maybe give your advice and to avoid, although it's a good room. I don't think there's any elected officials here. But given what's happening in the United States, given your experience there, given your experience in the Caribbean, if you were to give advice to any elected official that is currently trying to figure out how to talk to the United States about the importance of trade, or what a tariff will do, or why we shouldn't become the 51st state, do you have any advice that you would give?
Yeah, so I think two aspects of this, specifically as it relates to sort of the U.S. trade. I think energy of all forms, electricity and oil and gas, is something that we are blessed with. We have a huge resource, lots of promise, and that frankly is a helpful thing in the context of trade negotiations with the U.S. because that energy is something that they value too, and can be part of a solution, is an important part of the U.S. Energy mix today. And so, I do think that the energy file does give us, the Canadian government a bit of a leverage tool to use in what will, I'm sure, be a very complex set of trade negotiations as we deal with the next version of CUSMA. At the same time, I think within Canada, I think sort of the political environment, I think we also need to be having much more honest conversations with ourselves, with Canadians, with government, with customers, with business community around the energy transition. The pace at which the goal around decarbonizing, do we really need to get to 100% decarbonized? Is 90% good enough? And let's leverage that into a cost and clean advantage as it relates to our energy supply. And how fast should we get there? And just as importantly, who's going to pay? Is it customers? And let's be honest about what that cost impact is. Is it taxpayers? Some combination of the two. So I think just having much more honest conversations about the journey ahead would be wise. And that itself, I think, provides a much better framework for us to leverage the great strengths that we've got around the whole energy sector with our largest trading partner in the U.S.
Yep. So your advice to politicians is to be honest.
You were always honest.
I was. Thank you. I still am, Scott.
Yes.
But I appreciate that. Ladies and gentlemen, Scott Balfour, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just give me that.
Wow, thank you, Scott. On behalf of the Canadian Club Toronto, thank you for such a straightforward conversation. Really appreciate your candor and your humility. And we really do appreciate your leadership in this vitally important sector and issue. I know your family's worried that he's not going to fit through the doorway, but that's your problem to deal with. Anyway, one of the things we talked about was the importance of having honest conversations with Canadians. I mentioned earlier that we would love for you to share what you're taking away from today's session. There are 200 plus voices here that could get this conversation, this honest conversation out there. Some of my takeaways were we need to lean into the fact that the Canadian electric system is the third cleanest in the G20. I wasn't aware of that, albeit with provincial differences, but something that's important. There's a huge navigation of complexity that requires leadership, like we're seeing with Scott, climate adaptation, the increasing demand of electricity with data centers and electric cars, and thought about that either. And building trust-based relationships with our Indigenous communities. I also heard about the differences between the approaches in the US and Canada. What can we learn from each other? And I certainly picked up a lot of your learning mindset. And finally, pace is such an important part of the conversation, to have those honest conversations around the balance between pace and affordability and practical considerations. So thank you, Scott. And Lisa, as always, thank you for your masterful moderation and really for making it such a rich, insightful, and real conversation. And I know we can always count on you as a moderator to do that and to represent the audience. So let's give another round of applause. And before we close off, once again, I invite you to visit our website, canadianclub.org, to learn about upcoming events. We kick off 2025 on Wednesday, January the 8th, with our 48th annual Outlook, with 4 terrific panelists on Canada's long-standing and most popular economic forecast luncheon. I'll be there, and I hope to see you again. Thank you to our AV supplier, VVC Live, for your consistently reliable and professional support. And one final thank you to Team CIBC for sponsoring today's event. Members and guests, thank you again for joining us this morning. On behalf of the Canadian Club Board and team, I wish you a very happy holiday season. And thank you, Emera, for the lovely chocolates, your little holiday gift. And for you live streamers, next time be in the room because you don't know what you're going to miss. Anyway, thank you all for joining and have a great day.